Hi everybody, this is Dr. Sandy Queen from Queen Homeschool Supplies, and I'm sitting here in my office at the Holistic Wellness Center. As you know, our country right now is going through the coronavirus. You may be watching this years later and we're not going through this, but you'll surely remember this time. And so in light of the fact that many of the homeschool conventions I was scheduled to speak at this spring and summer have been canceled, I'm missing my opportunity to speak to you. And so I wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to be able to share with you some different segments and different videos from my session on an introduction to the Charlotte Mason method. So the first thing I want to do in talking about the Charlotte Mason method is to answer the question, who was Charlotte Mason? I'm glad you asked. Charlotte Mason was an educator in England in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and she had some very different, at the time, ideas of what she felt a child's education should and should not consist of. So her ideas were very different than other ideas of that time and of this time as well. One of the phrases or the terms that she coined was something called Twaddle. And twaddle was a term that Charlotte Mason used to refer to something that we today might call busy work, or something that is wasted time or done just for the sake of saying that we did something, but it wasn't really something beneficial to the student. In fact, many times it was detrimental because it would create a sense of boredom and just wasting the child's time and the teacher's time. So she was very much a proponent of eliminating what she called twaddle from a child's education. And that alone really is one factor in why, when you're using the Charlotte Mason approach, you will find that generally your school days are going to be much shorter, because the lessons that she preferred were short and very precisely focused lessons that would capture a child's complete attention span during that short time. And as a child grew in their age and abilities, as well as in their ability to pay attention longer, the lessons would increase in length as well. But still, they would be much shorter than what would typically be seen in what we might think of as a more traditional style of learning. Okay, so one of my favorite quotes from Charlotte Mason, and you probably have heard this if you're familiar at all with the Charlotte Mason method, goes like this: education is an atmosphere, a discipline, a life. And I'm going to start this series of videos with that quote and with dissecting that quote into those three components. Education is an atmosphere, a discipline, a life. And today we're going to look at education as an atmosphere. And what in the world does that mean? I believe what she was talking about with that quote is that something that you might want to ask yourself: is the atmosphere of your home conducive to learning? And if it's not, what can you do to make it so that it is conducive to learning, and to make the atmosphere in which you teach your children, whether it be in a little one-room schoolhouse replica, or whether it be at the kitchen table, or whether it be in your child's bedroom or on the living room couch, or wherever it may be, and that place may vary daily, but you want to make sure that the atmosphere of your home is conducive to learning. So let's talk about that for a few minutes. One of the things that you can do to make the atmosphere in your home conducive to learning is to integrate living books and make them readily available to your children. And when I say living books, you may not understand what that means. I'm going to talk about language arts and what living books are in another one of these videos. But just a quick overview of what a living book is. A living book is a book that brings the subject matter to life for the reader. So well-written literature, historical fiction that makes it feel like you're really there in that time period, biographies that do the same thing. There are many different types of living books, and I will be showing some and talking about some as these videos continue through the series that we're starting today. So you want to make sure, and once you find out more about what a living book is, then you'll understand this a little more. So make sure you watch all the videos. They're all going to be very short. So you want to have those living books in your home, but just as importantly, you want to make sure that they're accessible to your children. You know, sometimes we might make the mistake of collecting all these wonderful living books, and then they become so precious to us that we don't want to put them out where our kids can get them and maybe soil the pages or rip them or something. And of course, we do want to take care of them, and that's part of educating a child of the value of a good living book, is to take care of that living book properly. So I'm not saying you want to give these very expensive living books that you've sent to Europe for and disinfected, of course, to your toddler, perhaps, you know. But you want to make sure that the children who are able to read those books have them accessible to them, and they're not. I know one family who had a bunch of wonderful living books, but they had them all boxed up and put out in a shed, and because of the situation in which they were living at the time, in a very tiny house with a lot of people, they didn't have anywhere to put them. And so that's not what I'm talking about. You want to make sure that you have a place to make those books accessible to your children. Okay, another thing that you could do to make the atmosphere of your home more conducive to learning is to provide a room with a view. And I'm hoping that everyone watching this video has at least one window in your home. And if you do, you can use that window to create a room with a view. Even whether you live out in the middle of the country like I do and have a view out of every single window, mostly woods everywhere, but or whether you live in the inner city in a high-rise apartment, you can always use that window to create a room with a view. Obviously, that's very easy for someone who lives in a place where I do, where there's nature outside of every window. But let's say, for example, that you live in an inner city high-rise apartment, and you're wondering, okay, how in the world can I create a room with a view? All that I see outside the window is another high-rise, you know. What you can do is to put a window box, a flower box outside of there that will attract butterflies and birds. You can get one of those stick-on bird houses or bird feeders that sticks right on your window and attract birds in that way. There's always something that you can do. If you have a patio outside of your apartment, a little sliding door that goes out to a patio or something, or a balcony, then you can put some plants out there that will attract different creatures as well. So think about where God has placed you and what you have available to you that you can use to create that room with a view for yourself and your children. Okay, another thing that you can do is to provide quality music. And we've all heard those studies about how classical music can stimulate the brain to induce further learning and better learning and retention. But it can also expose your child to different types of music, to different composers. You can tie those into time periods that you happen to be studying and play music from the Civil War while you're studying the Civil War, and in that way you can use music as an adjunct to your learning or as part of your learning as well. Another thing is to incorporate art, and picture study was something that Charlotte Mason was very big on, and I will be talking about it more in another video and show you some resources for that. But picture study is basically exposing your child to fine artwork from the great masters, and again, that can be art that can be historical in nature, such as through our Observing History Through Picture Study series at Queen Homeschool Supplies, where we use artwork from different time periods that show what life was like during that time period. It also gives you the opportunity to study different artists of different time periods and different styles of art, and to induce creativity in your own children as they see those different styles, and maybe one of those styles really speaks to them and they think, wow, I would like to be able to paint like that, or I could paint like that. And so it can kind of spur on their creativity. And the last thing I'm going to talk about today focusing on that creativity is just to allow your children to be creative. And for me, when I was a young mom, and I have 6 children, but when I had my first 2 children, only a year apart in age, back then I had a little daycare center in my home. So I had, including my 2 children, I would have 6 children ages 2 and under in my house every single day. And so, I looked for ways to, of course, I didn't want to have a mess everywhere with kids getting creative. And I had to just put that nonsense out of my mind and realize that they're kids and they enjoy that creativity, and that's going to foster creativity in them for a lifetime. And so, what I did was to get an old plastic shower curtain, put it on the floor underneath the little table that we used, and I would do it in my kitchen where the floor was easier to clean. And I would just let them finger paint and play with Play-Doh and all those horribly messy things that I didn't really want to let them do, but I knew they would enjoy it. And so I want to encourage you to do the same. Let your kids be creative, whatever their age. Looking back now, my kids range from 33 years old down to 18 years old, and I see that they all have very creative minds. They're very artistic, they're very musical, they're very much into creating things and making different things. And I know part of that is because that's where we started, was just by allowing them to be creative, even though maybe inside I'd cringe a little bit just knowing that, oh, this is making such a mess. But I learned very young and very quickly to make sure that they knew before we got all the messy stuff out that they were just going to have to help me clean it up when we were done. So that's something you can instill that will help to train good habits, which we will talk about in one of our forthcoming videos as well. So I hope you've enjoyed this little bit of an introduction to the Charlotte Mason method and who she was, and we will continue this series with more videos going into more detail and more depth of what Charlotte Mason was all about, what her methods were all about, what she had to say about teaching different subjects. And if there's anything that I mentioned that you'd like to check out, you can do so on our website at queenhomeschool.com. Thank you.